I told you this was a mistake.
You don't know what you're talking about.
You're coming with us.
You are not boarding this plane. Step back.
Wait, there must be a misunderstanding. I have my ticket right here.
I said step back.
Your kind isn't welcome here.
And where is here exactly?
Right now, here is where you don't belong.
You are not leaving. Let go of me. I said, step back. No.
You are not authorized to be here. Get your hands off me. I said, step back. Make me.
Boots, sit down. You don't sit in this section. Marcus Webb froze the entire airline with a single phone call, and the man who made it happen didn't raise his voice once. Boots. Rain hit the windows of the Halcyon Airways Concourse Club at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, like it had somewhere better to be. Boots. It was 6:52 in the morning, the kind of gray that swallows the runway lights and turns every jet into a shadow rolling through mist. Boots. Inside, the lounge smelled like dark roast coffee and warm croissants, and everything about the room announced money the way a room does when it doesn't have to try. Boots. Leather chairs the color of aged whiskey, brass fixtures polished to a shine that reflected the ceiling lights in long gold streaks. Boots. A hush that only exists where people have paid not to be disturbed. Marcus Webb sat by the window in a gray wool overcoat that had seen a decade of winters, holding a paperback novel with a cracked spine. Boots. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet in the particular way of men who have learned that silence rarely gets misquoted. Boots. Beside his chair sat a duffel bag, not a briefcase. Canvas faded, the strap repaired once with dark thread that didn't quite match. Boots. Nothing about him looked like it belonged in a room with $1,000 armchairs. That was exactly the point. Behind the espresso counter, Renee Castellano moved through the room with a silver carafe, and the practiced radar of someone who had worked the Concourse Club for 11 years. Boots. She was 46, blonde hair pinned back tight, uniform pressed so sharp it looked like it could leave a paper cut. Boots. Renee knew who mattered in a room before they had to ask for anything. That was her gift, she told herself. Boots. That was her value. A man in a charcoal suit lifted 2 fingers without looking up from his laptop. Renee was at his side before his cup finished settling on the saucer. Boots. Refill, Mr. Whitfield? You read my mind, Renee. She laughed, soft and rehearsed, and moved to the next table, where a couple in matching camel cashmere asked about the pastry selection. Boots. Of course, let me bring the warm ones out just for you. Then she passed Marcus. Her eyes touched him for less than a second. Boots, his coat, his duffel bag, the paperback with the bent corner. Then her gaze slid off him entirely, the way people glance at an unmarked door and decide it isn't worth opening. Boots. No greeting, no coffee, no smile. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. 40 years of walking into rooms that assumed he was lost or delivering something or waiting for someone more important. He had built a kind of internal ledger for these moments, a private catalog of who saw him and who saw through him. Boots. He didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that flinching was a gift you handed to strangers, and he had stopped being generous with that particular gift. Boots. But the body remembers what dignity costs, even when the face doesn't show it. His thumb moved once against the cracked spine of his book, and stilled. Boots. To Renee Castellano, he was just a heavy-set older black man sitting too quietly in a room built for people she believed she already recognized. Boots. To the aviation world, Marcus Webb was something else entirely. 51 years old, principal owner of Meridian Capital Holdings, the private equity group that had rescued Halcyon Airways from bankruptcy 9 years earlier and still held 41% of its voting shares. Boots. Not the part passengers saw, not the boarding music or the champagne carts. The part underneath, the part that decided whether the airline's debt got refinanced, whether its board kept their seats, whether Halcyon Airways existed at all 5 years from now. Boots. The lounge he was sitting in, the airline that had just made him invisible, it was, in every legal and financial sense, partly his. Boots. Renee returned with a tray for the cashmere couple and set it down like an offering. Anything else I can get you to? Boots. The woman beamed. You're an absolute angel. Marcus glanced up briefly. Renee felt it. Her shoulders tightened half an inch, and for a moment she almost turned toward him. Boots. Almost. Then the overhead speaker crackled to life. Halcyon Airways Flight 214 to Newark. First-class passengers may now proceed to gate C9. Boots. Marcus closed his book slowly. The sound was soft, but Renee heard it, and when she looked at him this time, it wasn't warmth and it wasn't apology. Boots. It was relief, the particular relief of watching a problem remove itself. Marcus stood, buttoned his coat, and lifted his duffel bag onto his shoulder. Boots. His reflection followed him in the rain-streaked glass, tall, still, unreadable. No one in that lounge knew his name. No one knew that in 6 hours he had a call with Halcyon's board about a $300 million fleet expansion that would determine the airline's next decade. Boots. And Renee Castellano had no idea that the man she had just erased was about to become the reason her entire airline stopped moving. Boots. Gate C9 had the particular brightness of a place where people get sorted before they get seen. White light bouncing off polished tile. Gate agents behind a counter that looked more like a courtroom bench than a check-in desk. Boots. Marcus walked toward the priority lane with his boarding pass glowing on his phone, duffel bag balanced against his hip. Boots. Around him, passengers in wool coats checked watches and guarded their place in line like proximity to the jet bridge proved something about their worth. Boots. At the counter stood Diane Pruitt, 58 years old, silver blonde hair pulled into a severe twist, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. Boots. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture was immaculate. Her smile when she used it was calibrated precisely enough to look warm from 6 feet away and mean nothing up close. Boots. She smiled at the couple ahead of Marcus. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth. Newark again?" The husband chuckled. "Business, unfortunately." Boots. "Well, we'll make it as painless as we can." She scanned their passes, gestured toward the jet bridge with practiced grace. Boots. "Have a wonderful flight." Then Marcus stepped forward. The smile didn't fade. It vanished, gone in the space between one breath and the next, like a light switch flipped in a room she thought was empty. Boots. "Boarding pass, sir." Her voice stayed polished, official, safe enough to deny later. But underneath it sat something old and load-bearing, something that had been constructed over decades and reinforced daily. Boots. Marcus held out his phone. The scanner beeped. Diane's eyes moved to the screen, to Marcus, back to the screen. Boots. Her fingers began tapping, not confusion, calculation. A line was forming behind him now. A suitcase wheel squeaked against tile. Boots. "There appears to be an issue with your seat assignment." Marcus didn't blink. Seat 1A, first class. Confirmed 11 weeks ago. Boots. Diane exhaled through her nose, a small practice sound. The system showing a conflict, unusual. A pause. "We had an aircraft swap this morning." Boots. Marcus heard the lie land before she finished saying it. He sat on Halcyon's own operations committee. Aircraft swaps generated 17 separate system alerts across crew scheduling, catering, weight and balance, and dispatch. Boots. None had fired, not one. He kept his voice level. "What's the new assignment?" Diane tapped twice. "Economy Plus, seat 31C. Boots. A middle seat, 28 rows back. Behind him, someone muttered, "Come on, lady, let's move it." The Ashworths had stopped near the jet bridge, pretending not to listen while listening to every syllable. Boots. Marcus looked at her. "You released my first-class seat." Diane straightened, chin lifting a half-inch, the posture of someone who has decided in advance that she will not be the one who's wrong here. Boots. "Sir, I am simply telling you what the system shows." "No," Marcus said. "Quiet." Final, the lane went still around that single word. Boots. "You're telling me what you'd like me to accept." Color rose in Diane's cheeks. She wasn't used to being questioned by someone she had already decided should be grateful for whatever she gave him. Boots. From the jet bridge entrance, a man in a Halcyon supervisor's uniform stepped into view, broad through the shoulders, jaw set like it had been carved rather than grown. Boots. Grant Silman, 49, senior gate supervisor, 22 years with the airline. He looked at Diane, then at Marcus, and arrived at a conclusion far too fast. Boots. Problem here? Diane didn't take her eyes off Marcus. This passenger is refusing his reassignment. Marcus turned toward Grant slowly. Boots. I'm questioning why a seat I paid for was taken from me without explanation. Grant's smile had no warmth in it at all. Boots. Sir, we've got a schedule to keep. If you've been reassigned, please take the seat. Customer relations can sort out compensation after you land. Boots. This isn't about compensation. Grant's smile tightened at the corners. It usually is. The sentence landed harder than it should have, and for 1 second Marcus saw the whole machine of it, not the airline, not the gate, but the deeper architecture underneath, the one where dignity could be downgraded with a glance and a fabricated aircraft swap. Boots, where a man could pay in full, arrive early, follow every rule printed on the ticket, and still be treated like a correction that needed making. Boots. Neither Diane nor Grant knew who he was. Worse, neither of them cared to find out. That was the part that would matter later, though nobody in that line understood it yet. Boots. A phone lifted somewhere behind him, recording now, not to help, only to capture the delay for someone's feed. Boots. Marcus breathed in once, slow, and thought of his father. 31 years driving a delivery truck through Atlanta's West End, coming home every night with grease under his nails and a spine that never once bent for a man who talked down to him. Boots. Never beg for respect, his father used to say, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea sweating a ring into the wood. Boots. Make them answer for the lack of it. Marcus nodded once. Fine, he said, I'll take 31C. Diane exhaled, something close to a smile pulling at her mouth. Boots. Grant stepped aside. Marcus walked into the jet bridge without raising his voice, without looking back, without giving them the scene they had clearly been braced for. Boots. Diane turned to the next passenger, smile already rebuilt. Good morning. Boarding pass, please? She thought the moment was closed. Boots. It had only just started. Seat 31C was not a seat. It was a message, and Marcus read every word of it the moment he found it, wedged deep in Economy Plus, between a woman with a neck pillow and noise-canceling headphones already in place, and a broad-shouldered man who had claimed both armrests before boarding, had even finished. Boots. Overhead bins slammed shut somewhere behind him. A child cried 3 rows back. The cabin smelled like wet wool coats and reheated coffee and the low-grade irritation of people who had already been standing too long in a narrow tube. Boots. The woman by the aisle pulled one earbud free as Marcus stopped beside her row. Oh, she said, glancing at his boarding pass. Boots. That's you. Yes, ma'am. She got a tired smile and rose awkwardly, pressing herself into the aisle. Marcus turned sideways, lowered himself into the middle seat. Boots. His knees hit the seat back in front of him. His duffel bag barely fit beneath it. The man by the window looked at Marcus's coat, then his face, then away, as if eye contact might invite a conversation he had no interest in having. Boots. Marcus clicked his seatbelt. It sounded final. Up front, past the curtain, first class was settling into its usual hush. Glasses of orange juice on small trays, warm towels, a leather seat with room enough for a grown man to actually breathe. Boots. His seat. Paid for. Confirmed. Gone. No one around him knew what had happened at the gate. No one knew that the man wedged into 31C with his knees against a plastic seatback owned 4 in 10 shares of the very airline flying them to Newark. Boots. That was how humiliation usually worked, not with shouting, but with a laminated badge and a calm voice saying the system shows and waiting for you to swallow it whole. Boots. The woman beside him glanced over, late 60s, kind eyes, paperback resting on her lap. Rough morning, she asked softly. Boots. Marcus turned his head, met her eyes a beat, longer than necessary. She studied him, not suspicious, careful the way someone gets when they've lived long enough to know not every wound shows blood. Boots. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words, simple, human. They almost reached him. Almost. Before he could answer, Grant Silman pushed through the curtain and stopped near row 31, pretending to check overhead compartments, his gaze landing squarely on Marcus. Boots. All settled back here, sir. The word sir arrived, wrapped in something close to triumph. The woman by the aisle looked up at Grant, mouth tightening. Boots. I'm seated, Marcus said even. Good, we appreciate your cooperation. Cooperation, as if dignity had ever been offered a choice. Boots. Grant moved on, but Marcus caught the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth just before he vanished behind the curtain again. Boots. Somewhere in that smile was 22 years of never once having to answer for anything. The aircraft pushed back from the gate at 7:41 Boots. M-engines whined low, rising through the cabin floor. Seatbelts clicked, a baby whimpered and was hushed. Marcus looked down at his hands. Boots. Steady. That surprised even him. Something colder than anger was forming behind his ribs. Not rage, wasted motion, this was calculation. Boots. Clean, precise, controlled. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket before the signal disappeared for takeoff. He didn't call Diane Pruitt. Boots. He didn't call Grant Silman. He didn't call the customer relations line, where some exhausted agent would read an apology off a script and offer 40,000 bonus miles, as though respect had a loyalty point exchange rate. Boots. He called Priya Anand. She answered on the second ring, Marcus. Her voice sharpened instantly, alert, focused. She knew he never called mid-boarding unless something was wrong. Boots. Priya was 38, Meridian Capital's chief compliance and governance officer, the person who held the digital keys to every Covenant Meridian's investment carried inside Halcyon Airways operating systems. Boots. Priya, I need you to trigger the Sentinel Clause. Silence, not confusion, something heavier. Marcus, that's a full contractual freeze. Boots. It's never been invoked, not once, not even during the restructuring. It's being invoked now. Are we compromised? Is there a security issue? Boots. Marcus looked toward the curtain separating him from first class, where faint laughter drifted back. Not compromised, he said. Exposed. Boots. Priya understood enough not to ask the wrong question next. Authorization code. 9 Bravo 7. Full contractual lock. Ground operations only. No flight systems. Boots. No aircraft currently in the air. A pause. Then keys tapping fast and sure. Priya's tone shifted into something clipped and surgical. Boots. Confirmed. Sentinel Clause staging across scheduling, crew assignment, ground movement, baggage routing, fuel authorization, gate allocation, and dispatch clearance. Once executed, Halcyon loses right access to all ground operations until manual compliance release is signed by 2 Meridian board members and the airline's CEO in person. Boots. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He saw Renee's gaze sliding past him like he was furniture. Diane's manufactured concern. Boots. Grant's small, satisfied smile. Every passenger in that lounge who had watched him get smaller so they could stay comfortable. Boots. Execute, Marcus said. At the front of the aircraft, the cabin door sealed with a heavy thud. Priya's voice quiet now. Boots. Done. Marcus ended the call and looked out the window as Atlanta fell away beneath the wing, gray and wet, and utterly unaware of what had just been set in motion 60 feet from the ground. Boots. The first warning appeared in Halcyon's Global Operations Center in Charlotte at 7:52 a.m. as a thin amber line crawling across a wall-sized screen. Boots. Nobody panicked. Not yet. Beneath rows of pale blue monitors, the night shift analysts watched the airline's entire nervous system pulse across the country. Every aircraft a dot, every crew member a name in motion, every route a single thread in a web too vast for any human being to track without software carrying the weight. Boots. Sasha Reyes noticed it first. 29 sharp, 3 hours into a double shift, a cup of coffee gone cold at her elbow. Boots. Her screen showed Flight 119 out of Charlotte, ready for pushback. Crew checked in, aircraft fueled, gate clear, bags loaded. Boots. She clicked dispatch validation. Denied. She frowned. Clicked again. Denied. That's strange, she muttered. Across the aisle, a systems coordinator named Marcus. No relation, a coincidence that would get mentioned later with grim humor. Looked up. Boots. What's odd? Charlotte just failed crew validation. But the crew's legal. Captains checked in, first officers checked in, cabins complete. Boots. Try it again. She did, a third time, denied. The words sat there on the screen, flat and absolute. Sasha leaned back slowly. Boots. Airlines run on permission, not intention. Permission to fuel, permission to load, permission to push back from the gate and become a machine instead of 200 tons of parked metal. Boots. Anyone else getting right access errors? She called out, louder now. For a moment, only the hum of servers answered. Then a hand went up 2 rows over. Boots. Fuel authorization frozen in Denver. Another voice from the back. Baggage routing locked in Newark. A third. Dispatch clearance not writing anywhere in the Northeast corridor. Boots. The room changed. Subtle at first. Rolling chairs stopped rolling. Keyboards slowed. Faces lifted toward the main screen where amber lines were deepening into orange, then red. Boots. Aircraft dots that had been crawling across the map began freezing in place, one by one, as though an invisible hand had pressed down on the entire airline at once. Boots. Dan Carell, the shift supervisor, walked over with a paper coffee cup he'd stopped drinking from within the next 10 seconds. Boots. 52, built like a man who'd spent 3 decades pretending pressure didn't reach him. What are we looking at? Sasha didn't take her eyes off the screen. Boots. Multiple write access failures. Not isolated, not regional. Vendor outage? No, read access is clean. We can see everything. We just can't touch anything. Boots. Dan leaned closer. Then what can't we do? Sasha swallowed. Move anything. That sentence killed the last bit of calm left in the room. Boots. Dan set his coffee down without drinking it. Get network ops, get legal. Get Meridian Capital on the phone right now. Boots. A banner unrolled across the main screen in stark white text on a black field. Sentinel clacked. Ground operations suspended. Boots. Sasha stared at the words. She'd worked at Halcyon for 6 years. She'd lived through ice storms, cyber attacks, fuel shortages, holiday meltdowns that made veteran pilots swear into their radios. Boots. She had never once seen those words. Then the counter started climbing. 6 aircraft held, 14, 29, 53. A young dispatcher near the front whispered, "What's happening?" Boots. No one answered, because the answer was worse than a system failure. A failure could be fixed. This looked intentional. Boots. In a glass office above the operations floor, Halcyon's chief operating officer, Regina Okafor, arrived with her blazer half-buttoned and sleep still caught in the corner of one eye. Boots. Someone had called her at home. Someone else had called her driver before she finished her first sentence. She stopped at the edge of the room. Boots. One look at the wall told her this wasn't a routine outage. Professionals go quiet in a particular way when disaster arrives. Boots. Not loud, not frantic, focused and afraid to work. Breath. "What failed?" she asked. Dan handed her a tablet. Nothing failed. Boots. "That's the problem." Regina read the screen. Sentinel Clause, full ground operations freeze, initiated by Meridian Capital Holdings. For a second her face went completely still. Boots. Every executive at Halcyon knew what Meridian Capital was. Their 41% wasn't a courtesy stake. It was oxygen. It had kept the airline flying when 3 competitors had folded during the same downturn 9 years earlier. Boots. "Who authorized this?" Dan's mouth tightened. Authorization code traces to Marcus Webb. The name dropped into the room like a dead weight. Boots. Sasha turned from her station, pale now. "Sir, there's also an incident report just filed out of Atlanta, gate C9. Boots. Regina stared at her. Sasha kept going, voice smaller. "Passenger reassignment. First class to economy plus. Seat 1A to 31C. Boots. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sasha looked down at the report again. The passenger was Marcus Webb. No one moved. Boots. No one spoke. And at 36,000 feet above the Appalachian foothills, Marcus Webb sat wedged in seat 31C, hands folded, eyes closed, while the airline that had made him invisible for 11 minutes began to understand exactly what invisible had cost them. Boots. Regina Okafor had seen engines fail mid-climb, cruise time out over the Atlantic, ice storms swallow entire terminals whole. She had never seen this. Boots. On the operations wall, Halcyon Airways stood frozen. Atlanta, Charlotte, Denver, Newark, Chicago, Dallas. Aircraft sitting nose out at gates with passengers strapped in and crews ready to go. Boots. The systems could see every one of them. The systems knew the fuel was loaded, the crews were legal, the gates were clear. Boots. They simply would not authorize the next step. No smoke, no alarms. Just refusal. Regina's phone rang before she could decide who to call first. Boots. The screen read Halcyon CEO, Wendell Trask. She answered. "Wendell, what in God's name is happening?" His voice was rough, thick with sleep, and something closer to fear than she'd ever heard from him. Boots. "We have a full ground operations freeze. I've got board members calling from 4 time zones. Tell me it's a glitch." Boots. "It's not a glitch." "Then, what is it?" Regina looked at the tablet again, though she already knew. Meridian Capital triggered the Sentinel Clause. Boots. The line went quiet. Then Wendell said one word. "Why?" Regina turned toward the glass wall overlooking the operations floor, where Sasha Reyes stood at her console, pale, reading the Atlanta incident report line by line, her expression tightening a little more with every sentence, as though the document itself were ashamed of what it contained. Boots. "Because our people at Gate C9 downgraded Marcus Webb from first class to a middle seat in the back of the plane." Boots. For several seconds, Wendell said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, the arrogance was gone from his voice. The polish was gone too. Boots. "Marcus Webb was on one of our flights?" "Yes." "Which one?" "Flight 24 Newark, Gate C9, and we moved him." Boots. "Yes." "To where?" Regina swallowed. "Seat 31C. The silence on the line felt physical. Regina could picture Wendell in his house in Buckhead, barefoot on cold hardwood, suddenly understanding that this wasn't a difficult passenger, wasn't a viral inconvenience they could smooth over with a canned statement and a fruit basket. Boots. They had insulted the man who owned the keys to their entire operation. Wendell's voice returned, lower now. "Get me every record from that gate." Boots. "Scanner logs, cameras, employee notes, everything, already pulling it, and find out exactly who touched that reassignment." Regina glanced at Sasha, who looked up from the incident report. Boots. Gate agent Diane Pruitt entered the override. Senior supervisor Grant Silman confirmed it and physically blocked the passenger from returning to first class. Boots. Regina repeated the names. Wendell's tone turned to ice. Put them on administrative leave immediately. Regina almost laughed, though there was no humor left anywhere in the building. Boots. Wendell, with respect, administrative leave isn't going to restart 209 aircraft. Across the room, a dispatcher called out, Denver requesting manual override authority. Boots. Someone answered before anyone could stop them. Another voice. JFK ground control wants an estimated recovery time. Sasha looked up again. Boots. Sir, social media's moving. Passengers in Denver and Newark are posting video from the gates. #Halcyon Freeze is already trending in 6 states. Boots. Regina closed her eyes for half a second. Boots. This was how modern disasters actually spread. Not through official statements, but through tired travelers with phones, through business commuters stuck in leather seats going nowhere, through grandmothers missing connections, through pilots forced to tell full cabins they had no update because there genuinely was none to give. Boots. By 9:15 a.m., 209 Halcyon Airways flights sat frozen across the country. 41,000 passengers stranded mid-journey. Boots. The number kept climbing on cable news tickers throughout the morning, and by the time Marcus Webb's flight touched down in Newark, the figure being repeated on every network was 231 flights and counting. Boots. Marcus deplaned without a word to anyone, walked past the gate where his own ticket had been rewritten 4 hours earlier, and did not stop for the man in the Halcyon blazer who tried, twice, to intercept him with an apology clearly written by someone else. Boots. He took a car directly to a conference suite at Newark Liberty's executive terminal, where Priya Anand was already waiting with a tablet, a folder, and an expression that said the machinery he'd set in motion was working exactly as designed. Boots. They're panicking, Priya said as he sat down. Wendell Trask has called 11 times in the last 90 minutes. The board's requesting an emergency session. Boots. Regina Okafor's been on with the FAA twice already, explaining that this isn't a safety issue. It's a governance issue, and that's somehow making it worse for them, not better. Boots. Good, Marcus said, set up the call. 40 minutes later, the wall screen in the conference suite lit up with 5 faces arranged in a grid. Wendell Trask, CEO, tie loosened, the polish scraped clean off him. Boots. Regina Okafor, still in the same blazer from 6 hours earlier. 2 attorneys, one of them visibly exhausted, precise in the way people get when they know the ground beneath them has already shifted. Boots. And Halcyon's chief communications officer, a young man named Preston Doyle, who looked like he hadn't sat down once since sunrise. Boots. Wendell spoke first, and he tried badly to sound like a man still in control. Marcus. On behalf of Halcyon Airways, I want to personally apologize for what happened at Gate C9 this morning. Boots. We're prepared to offer a full refund, a lifetime platinum upgrade, and a public statement acknowledging. You're trying to buy back an hour of embarrassment, Marcus said, and his calm made the offer sound smaller than it already was. Boots. I'm not here for a refund. I'm here to discuss accountability. One of the attorneys leaned toward her camera. 40s, careful, running on fumes. Boots. Mr. Webb, with respect, the Sentinel Clause is causing catastrophic operational damage. 200,000 passengers who had nothing to do with this morning are being affected right now. Boots. Marcus looked directly at her. I agree. That answer visibly surprised her, he continued. Innocent passengers shouldn't be paying for what your gate staff decided about my worth this morning. Boots. That's precisely why this conversation needs to move quickly. Wendell's voice hardened, the fear curdling briefly back into something like defensiveness. Boots. What exactly do you want? For the first time, Marcus placed a folder flat on the table in front of him. Boots. The sound was soft. Everyone on the screen heard it anyway. My team prepared this before I landed. He didn't open it yet. Boots. Meridian's legal division has attached the Sentinel enforcement terms. Priya has attached the scanner logs. Your own systems confirm the override. Diane Pruitt's employee ID 714A. Boots. No aircraft swap in the record anywhere. There was never a seat conflict. There was a decision. Regina's jaw tightened. Boots. Wendell said nothing. 3 conditions, Marcus said. No one moves until I've said all 3. He opened the folder but didn't look down at it. Boots. He didn't need to. First, Diane Pruitt and Grant Silman are terminated today. Not transferred. not quietly retrained in some diversity module they'll forget by Friday. Boots. Terminated for discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and falsifying an operational record to justify it. Regina flinched, just slightly, in a way she probably didn't know the camera caught. Boots. Second. Wendell, you issue a public statement within the hour. Not customer experience language, not vague regret. You name exactly what happened: racial bias, abuse of authority, a wrongful downgrade, and you say it on camera yourself, not through Preston's team. Boots. The communications officer went visibly pale. Within the hour, Marcus repeated. Preston stopped talking entirely. Third, Marcus paused, and even through the screen, everyone felt the shift in the room. Boots. Halcyon Airways funds an independent passenger dignity and anti-bias initiative. $60 million over 10 years. Independent oversight board, not internal HR. Boots. Annual public reporting. Mandatory de-escalation and bias recognition certification for every gate agent, flight attendant, supervisor, and captain in the system. Recertified annually. Audited by a third-party Meridian, has no financial stake in. Boots. Wendell stared out from the screen. You want to dictate our internal culture? No, Marcus said. Your internal culture built Gate C9. Boots. I'm asking for outside accountability, because your inside accountability clearly wasn't working. The attorney opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to find the counter-argument fast enough. Boots. Wendell leaned back in his chair, and for a moment the whole call sat in silence, the kind that has weight. Boots. You're asking me to humiliate my own company, he finally said. Marcus stood slowly, unhurried. No, he said. Your company did that at Gate C9 at 6:52 this morning. Boots. I'm asking you to tell the truth about it. Outside the conference suite windows, camera flashes were already going off against the glass from a small press pool that had assembled the moment word leaked that Marcus Webb was in Newark. Boots. The air in the room felt thin. Regina Okafor took off her glasses and pressed her fingers into her eyes, looking like a woman finally exhausted from defending a machine that had spent the morning hurting people while insisting it existed to serve them. Boots. Then she spoke, the first fully honest sentence anyone from Halcyon had offered all day. Wendell, she said quietly. Boots. We should accept. He looked at her through the screen. Regina. We should accept, she repeated. Not because we're cornered. Boots. Because he's right. The room changed again, not repaired, but pierced by something true for the first time since the amber warning line had appeared in Charlotte 6 hours earlier. Boots. Marcus looked at Regina for a long moment. He saw fear there, yes, but also something closer to shame. Boots. The real kind. The kind that might still turn into responsibility if it wasn't buried under legal language before it had the chance. Boots. Wendell closed his eyes. When he opened them, his voice had dropped an octave. Send the documents. They're already in your inbox, Marcus said. Boots. Wendell's reflection sat trapped in the black conference table like a cold window looking in on itself. He nodded once. Boots. Then we sign. He signed because there was no cleaner way out, and every lawyer on that call knew it. Boots. The agreement went through at 1:47 p.m., in a quiet room at Newark Liberty, while rain kept tapping against the glass, the same rain that had been falling in Atlanta 7 hours earlier, when Renee Castellano first looked past Marcus Webb without seeing him at all. Boots. No one smiled when the documents were signed. No one shook hands over video. The attorneys reviewed every line twice, then read it a third time out of habit rather than necessity. Boots. Regina stood near the window of her Charlotte office, arms folded, watching 200 and some aircraft, still sitting motionless under a gray sky. Boots. Marcus waited. Not impatiently, precisely. Across the country, passengers were still stuck at gates. Parents were calming exhausted toddlers. Flight crews were fielding questions they couldn't fully answer. Boots. Pilots sat in cockpits with fuel loaded and nowhere permitted to go. Marcus knew all of it. He felt the weight of every delayed connection and missed wedding and rebooked funeral flight sitting somewhere in that number. Boots. Power used correctly was never light in the hand. His father had told him that once too, though in different words, standing over an engine he was fixing for a neighbor for free. Boots. Then Wendell's statement went live. Not from a junior spokesperson, not from a nameless corporate account. Wendell Trask appeared on camera himself, seated beneath the Navy Halcyon Airways logo, looking a decade older than he had that morning. Boots. At Gate C9 in Atlanta this morning, he said, voice controlled but visibly strained, our employees wrongfully downgraded Mr. Marcus Webb from a seat he had paid for and confirmed, after treating him through the lens of racial bias. Boots. They abused their authority. They lied about the reason. They failed him. They failed the passengers whose flights they held hostage all morning, and they failed the values this company claims to represent. Boots. The words moved fast. Screens lit up across terminals in 9 cities. News anchors repeated the sentence about racial bias almost word for word, over and over throughout the afternoon. Boots. Passengers who had spent the morning furious about delays went quiet, one by one, when they finally understood why the planes had stopped moving at all. Boots. In Atlanta, Diane Pruitt sat in a back office with her badge on the table in front of her, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone bloodless. Boots. She kept repeating that she had only followed what the system showed her, but the scanner log told a different story, and the override carried her employee ID, time-stamped, unambiguous. Boots. There had been no aircraft swap. There had never been a conflict. There had only been a decision, made in under 4 seconds, about who deserved a window seat and who didn't. Boots. At Newark, Grant Silman took the call in a crew break room, a paper cup of coffee going cold in front of him. Boots. First, he argued. Then he tried to blame the gate system. Then his voice cracked. I didn't know who he was, he said. Boots. The HR director on the line answered softly, almost gently, which somehow made it worse. That was the problem, Grant. Boots. Not that you didn't know. That it mattered to you at all whether you knew. Grant sat there a long time after the call ended, staring at the cold coffee, understanding, maybe for the first time in 22 years, that the issue had never been Marcus Webb's title. Boots. It had been the way Grant treated him before he had any idea what that title was. Back in the Newark conference suite, Regina approached with the final signed confirmation on a tablet. Boots. Terminations are processed, she said. The public statement is out. The passenger dignity initial announcement drops within the hour. Independent oversight begins seat selection within 30 days. Boots. Marcus looked at her and the certification program. Mandatory, gate agents, flight attendants, supervisors, captains, annual recertification, public reporting starting next quarter. Boots. Marcus studied her face. There was no victory in it, only exhaustion, and maybe the early edge of something honest trying to surface through it. Boots. He called Priya Anand. She answered before the first ring finished. Ready? Marcus looked out at the tarmac where a long line of aircraft sat waiting beneath low clouds, silver bodies patient and still impatient at once. Boots. Begin restoration. All regions. Screens across the country shifted from red to amber, amber to green. Crew validations cleared. Fuel authorizations synchronized. Boots. Baggage routing unlocked. Dispatch permissions reopened, region by region, gate by gate. One by one, the airline began breathing again. Not all at once, but carefully, deliberately. The way something pulled from deep water starts moving again only once it remembers how. Boots. By nightfall, Halcyon Airways was flying on schedule. But it wasn't the same company that had woken up that morning, and it could never pretend to be again. Boots. The old sickness had been named out loud, in public, on camera by its own CEO. That mattered, not because words alone fix anything, but because silence had been the thing protecting it for years. Boots. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in March, the Halcyon Concourse Club at Hartsfield-Jackson looked almost exactly the same. Boots. Same brass fixtures, same leather chairs the color of aged whiskey, same smell of dark roast and warm pastries drifting through recessed lighting. Boots. But behind the espresso counter now stood a new attendant, 26, name tag, reading Anike, who had gone through the new mandatory bias recognition certification 3 weeks after it launched and had genuinely, visibly taken it to heart. Boots. She moved through the room the same way Renee once had, reading who needed a refill, who needed a pastry, who needed to simply be greeted, except now she greeted everyone the same way, without pausing to calculate who deserved it. Boots. A man in a faded gray coat sat by the window with a paperback and a canvas duffel bag at his feet. Boots. Anika approached without a flicker of hesitation. Can I get you something this morning, sir? We've got a fresh pot just brewed. Boots. Marcus looked up, and something in his face eased, just slightly, in a way that would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Boots. Coffee would be good. Thank you. Of course. She smiled, poured, and moved on to the next table, treating it exactly the same way she'd treated his. Boots. Renee Castellano no longer worked at the Concourse Club. She had transferred quietly to a regional ticket counter in Savannah after 11 weeks of mandatory certification and what internal reports described only as a performance review reassignment. Boots. She was not fired. There had been no override on any record with her name on it, nothing that met the legal bar of what had happened at Gate C9. But something in her had clearly understood, without needing to be told twice, that the lounge she'd run for 11 years now expected something from her she hadn't been in the habit of giving. Boots. Diane Pruitt filed a wrongful termination suit against Halcyon Airways 4 months after her firing. It was dismissed in 4 weeks. Boots. The scanner logs, unedited and time-stamped, made the outcome close to inevitable. She now works reservations for a regional carrier out of a call center in Macon, and according to 2 former Halcyon colleagues who still speak to her, she maintains, to this day, that she was simply following what the system showed her. Boots. She has never once, in any documented conversation, said the words "I was wrong." Grant Silman did something different. 8 weeks after his termination, he requested, unprompted, on his own, to sit in as an observer during one of the new mandatory de-escalation certification sessions, the same one every current Halcyon employee now has to pass. Boots. He wasn't required to attend. He wasn't being paid to attend. He sat in the back of a conference room in Charlotte and listened to a facilitator walk through the exact sequence of events from Gate C9, presented anonymously as a case study, watching 30 gate agents half his age take notes on the moment that had ended his career. Boots. Afterward, according to the facilitator, he stayed behind and said only one sentence: "I wish someone had shown me this 20 years ago." Boots. Then he left, and nobody at Halcyon has seen him since. Marcus Webb still flies through Atlanta most weeks. He still wears the same gray coat, still carries the same duffel bag with its mismatched thread, still sits quietly with a paperback until his flight is called. Boots. He has never once mentioned to anyone at the airline that he owns part of it. He doesn't need to anymore. Boots. The story did that work for him, the way true stories eventually do. On the anniversary of the Sentinel Clause freeze, a reporter caught him near a side exit at Hartsfield-Jackson. No entourage, no security detail, just a man walking toward a waiting car. Boots. "Mr. Webb," she called out, "was it worth it? 231 flights, 41,000 passengers stranded. Was it worth it?" Boots. Marcus stopped. For a moment, the noise of the terminal seemed to soften around him. He thought of Renee's eyes sliding past him like he was furniture. Boots. Diane's calm, rehearsed lie about an aircraft swap that never happened. Grant's small, satisfied smile before he disappeared behind the curtain. Boots. He thought of every person who has ever had to prove they belonged somewhere they had already quietly earned the right to be. Boots. "It'll be worth it," he said, "if the next person doesn't have to make the same call I did." He got into the car, and the door closed softly behind him. Boots. Behind him, planes rose into the dark Atlanta sky, carrying people across the country, across oceans, across the small, ordinary distances of everyday lives. And somewhere inside that movement sat a warning no airline, no company, no room full of leather chairs and brass fixtures could afford to ignore again. Boots. Dignity was never an upgrade. It was always the price of doing business with human beings. If this story reminded you of someone who was ever treated like they didn't belong, leave a comment with the words "respect matters." I read every single one. Boots. And if you believe stories like this still need to be told, stay close, because the next one is already waiting.